Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome into Season 5, Episode 2 of the Canucks Speakeasy Podcast. I'm Pete.
And I'm Doug.
I'm Brendan, aka Jabo, or Jabo, whatever the hell you want to call me.
Whoa. We got a third voice on here finally. Welcome to the show.
At some point, I was going to make my debut, and as I said on Twitter, like a good veteran, I just don't give two shits about the preseason. So, one day away from the regular season, let's get this going.
We also don't like to rush our prospects here. We like a little bit of seasoning time and ease them into the lineup.
Got to let them simmer down in the AHL, right?
Yeah, drinking beer and probably not eating healthy enough, right?
Well, welcome to the show, Brendan. It's good to have a third co-host on this year. We're pretty stoked to have you, and I think we're all pretty excited. Canucks season is right around the corner, eh? I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday. The NHL season has started. It's Bedard versus Crosby tonight, but the Canucks actually get another season going tomorrow. How are you guys feeling?
Well, I was feeling pretty good until today. I think, I'd be interested to see like the difference between the three of us and all the people that we know spend so much time on Twitter and those who don't. Because, I was speaking to my dad earlier, my dad being a huge Canuck fan. And I mean, and my mom also, they're both Canuck fans. And they didn't know anything about what was going on today. Connor Garland wanted to trade. What the hell? I didn't know that. So all this other stuff, maybe it's just for us that are so insulated on Twitter. It's what we pay attention to. It's what we know. And we tend to get more info than probably we should get. And we tend to take things a little bit, over the top. So,
No.
Canucks Twitter.
No.
But, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm excited for tomorrow. It's a new season, like in every other sport, it's a new opportunity. And I'm more confident going into this season than certainly that I was coming out of preseason last year, where they were just god awful. The games in this preseason where they played everybody, they looked quite good and looked good within their system. PK looks much better. Goal scoring, I mean, that could be an issue, but the hope is for me is that they keep the puck out of the net.
Yeah, I look, going back to your sentiment about Twitter, I have friends who aren't on Twitter but are massive Canuck fans, and I just think it's kind of like what this day and age is, where all of that information is just out there at your fingertips. Where before you'd have to wait for like sports page to come on, or Squire Barnes at 6:45 for the sport little podcast on BC TV News, or I guess whatever it is now. And to have all that information out there, it's great. But the other problem that comes with that is everybody's opinion is now also out there. And when it used to just be the message boards of Hockey Futures at Canucks.com, and now it's like, an endless message board of people's opinions on what the Canucks should or shouldn't be doing with a 5th round pick. It makes for an amazing time to be alive and be a Canucks fan, whether you agree with the mob or not.
I feel like I need to remind people on that are specifically on Canuck Twitter, and I'm assuming we're going to get some people listening that follow us on Twitter. No one gives two shits about your opinion. No one cares whether you're right or wrong. It doesn't matter. This is supposed to be fun. Sports are supposed to be fun. Even if your team sucks, it's supposed to be fun, So don't take yourself that seriously. There's just so many people who take themselves too seriously. And I'm as opinionated as anybody. I mean, I have my opinions. I'm passionate about them. But at the end of the day, I know that some of the time I'm going to be wrong. And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong. It's about enjoyment. It's about a community of people who love this team, that are passionate about this team. We're not always going to agree, because who the hell all agrees on sports takes? It just doesn't happen. But don't take yourself so seriously. I mean, that's my advice to anybody who is either on Canucks Twitter already, or on Twitter period, or who is thinking of joining us. Don't take yourself seriously.
Twitter has no filter. So how about we tell everyone where they can find us on Twitter? I'm at Pete_Gas. The podcast is at Canucks Speak.
You can give me a follow on Twitter at Doug Venn. We also have the Canucks Speakeasy outro playlist on Twitter, on Spotify. Check that out as well. we keep adding songs to the playlist.
And I am at Jabo, JABO_Vancouver. Yeah, that's where I am.
And for those who are on YouTube, you can also see our lovely handles scrolling on the bottom of the screen there. All right, lots to talk about in the Canucks world here. Let's start with opening night roster, and there's a lot of things that are going to tie into this because there's been a lot of moves going on this week with cap situations as well as a trade. Got a couple injuries as well, so maybe we have to wait to see some of the guys like Carson Soucy. What are you guys thinking about this opening night roster and how it's shaping up? How do you feel going into this game against Edmonton tomorrow?
I don't know. I mean, really, this has been a complete overhaul of the system they play and the way that they play. I mean, we got, an idea of how Tocchet wanted them to play, at the end of last season, in the back half of last season. But really, we got a better idea in this preseason. So we got a couple of games where we got the full roster. Certainly, I do like the way the PK has looked. I think that's, and I've been saying this for a very, very long time, and people who follow me, whether it's on Facebook or on Twitter, know, I've said, if you want to make the playoffs, you got to have a percentage of your special teams in and around somewhere between 100 and 105%, if not higher than that. And if you can get into that level, you give yourself a very good chance of at least being in the mix to make the playoffs, if not making the playoffs. Some issues with scoring, but again, to me, this year and this season is all about getting this team to buy into playing with structure, buying into, there's that word, structure, buying into playing well defensively. Because I believe that once they can get those fundamentals of how you play defensively ingrained into who they are, that will then open things up offensively. We've seen it in the past with this team back in better days, and that's my hope with this group. The roster's not perfect right now. Obviously, there's issues on defense. I think they want to move out some forwards and get bigger and faster. But this season is a stepping stone for them to hopefully move in the direction of being a contender.
Yeah, I think they've made some improvements to the team from when the season ended to now. I'm looking at their opening night roster. There's a couple of head scratchers, I guess. I don't think he's going to play, but Vasily Podkolzin, I guess they called him back up probably for cap purposes. So he's on the opening night roster, but he's probably not going to play. I'm not sure. Nils Hoglander is still on the big club roster, which I don't think any of us are surprised with. The other one that's a little bit surprising, I think, is Noah Juleson. I thought Cole McWard played pretty well in some of the preseason games he got to play, especially paired with Quinn Hughes, but I know he's still a pretty young guy. Juleson brings a little bit more physicality as a partner to play with Hughes, a la Luke Shen, or going back to Chris Tanev, who was never necessarily the most physical guy, but, he was a guy that would definitely stand up for his teammates and just a very cerebral defensive partner. So I'm interested to see how Juleson fares in this game. And then obviously, like you guys both touched on, there's some injuries. Carson Soucy, is he going to play? I don't think so. It's probably going to be a guy like Guillaume Brisebois that gets in there, but I'm excited. We got Edmonton game 1, should be a really good matchup, but I do agree with what you said, Brendan. I do think this year there's going to be a lot less goals. I think it's going to be a lot of 3-2 games, 2-1 games. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll get a 4-2 game. But I think, we're going to see a lot of 1-goal games this year for the Canucks.
And we've also seen the Hughes-Hronek pairing a little bit lately, and that might be something that we see game 1. I'm also kind of curious about watching the wing and who's going to be playing with Petey and Kuzmenko. I think that could be a good spot to try out Hoglander for a little bit tomorrow. I'm not sure if they will or not, but there's a lot of moving pieces in the forward core and the defense. And, Mikheyev's out right now, mentioned Soucy as well. Brisebois and Bluger are both banged up a bit as well. It's going to be interesting to see how the team comes out. Cause you remember the guys upstairs saying, hey, if everything goes right, we're a playoff team. It's like, well, you got a lot of things coming out of the gate here that aren't necessarily going right. So I'm really curious to see how they come out of the gate tomorrow at home against the Oilers.
My assumption is that we'll see on that top line, Garland start there, and obviously Garland made news, with, and again, like I'll say this, I mean, no one should be surprised that he's asked for a trade. I don't think that's any shock. I think we knew that. I think we know that both sides, um, both sides would like, for a change. I'll say this: what I think happened was, we know that Garland got a new agent within the last 48 hours, I believe. And what I think happened is that he's known to be a very aggressive agent, and he went out and let teams know that his client was available. And it probably got back to Elliot Friedman and the media through someone from one of those other teams. I'll say this: I'm not happy with Garland and his team. They should have shut up and known better. He should have known better and told his agent, you know what, we're going into this season. We want to change, but now let's just shut this down until we get into the season a bit and see how things go. But instead, you know what? I mean, his agent, I assume, went around and let teams know that he was available, and we've now got this stupid shitstorm that this team didn't need 24 hours before their first game of the season against a team that's expected to be a Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, I think if you look at everything that the Canucks did this offseason, outside of being able to sign Petey to a contract extension, which a lot of players don't always sign those long-term contracts a year before free agency. They'll kind of wait at least until, their contract ends. This team was doing everything in their power to get rid of any distractions heading into this season. There was a lot of speculation they would potentially not have a captain going into this year. No, I don't want to say completely out of the blue, but they announced Quinn Hughes as their captain. That's no longer a distraction. That's no longer, this team doesn't have a captain. Who's going to be the captain? It's Quinn Hughes. Tanner Pearson. There was a lot of speculation he was going to start the season on LTIR. He didn't. He ended up being at training camp for the first half an hour or whatever it was. They traded him immediately to the Montreal Canadiens. Now that storyline is no longer a distraction. So I do think management's got to be pissed. They got to be pissed. And Rick Dhaliwal, actually, he tweeted something saying, I don't believe this was a trade request. I get the feeling the Canucks think it's a win-win situation for both sides. If the agent can help and they can move him out in a tight cap world. So, take that with what you will. I think Dhaliwal's pretty connected, and, I trust the stuff that he reports on. But like you said, this shouldn't have gotten out. And the day before the season starts, I do think management's going to be a little bit pissed off about this. But I also wonder if in the offseason, maybe they told Garland they were going to try to facilitate a trade and they just couldn't get one done. And now he's hired a new agent, and now the agent's stepping in to try to make that happen and to force management's hand. Either way, it's not the greatest situation. Pete, I like what you said about the opening night roster. What if Garland starts on the top line? Well, that's a great way to showcase him if he's playing with Kuzmenko and Petey. Maybe he can pot a couple of goals and, bump up his trade value.
That was Brendan. I had
Brendan. That was Brendan that said that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, come on. Give credit where it's due, Doug.
Sorry.
It also sounds like that Canucks and Garland have been talking trade for a while. It sounds like this is something that they've been working on over the summer, and they hadn't actually gotten anything done because there's no value for wingers with close to $5 million contracts right now. We saw that in free agency, and we saw that at the trade deadline last year. So it's extremely tough to move a guy like him. I think the Canucks are extremely reluctant to put in another asset on top of Garland, which means that they may have to retain salary, which I think is also not something that they're trying to really feel comfortable with. So it may be one of those cases where you're moving a contract for a contract. Maybe another team has a guy in that $4.5 to $5 million range with some term as well that they want to unload. I that's the only way I can really see a trade getting done right now.
It has to make sense. I mean, you can't just make a deal for the sake of making a deal. I mean, because Connor Garland's a good enough player where he can be effective, in his role. You don't need to trade him. It's not like you're trading I'm trying to come up with the name of a player but it's not like you're trading a plug here. You're trading a guy who does have value. The problem is his value isn't $5 million a year. So, I mean, the one thing that kind of, bugs me a bit in all this is that, I mean, I don't understand what Connor Garland really thought changing agents was going to do. It doesn't change what the cap is right now. It doesn't change the fact that, teams just aren't willing to make deals that make sense. They want their cake and eat it too, which is what the Canucks want right now. And we're not in a landscape that makes sense to make a deal for them. So what do? You shut up, you go out, you play your ass off. And you know what? You try to show teams that you're not even just worth that $5 million contract, that contract isn't quite what you are worth. Go out, have a career year. That's how you get traded. And who knows? Maybe you go out and you have a career year and you decide, playing here really isn't that bad. We're starting to win. Things are starting to go better. I'm starting to feel better about playing where I'm playing. And, everything's happy in that regard. But, bringing in a new agent 48 hours before the beginning of the season and expecting he was going to pull a Houdini act and find you a trade partner when no one could before was just, to me, a little naive.
Well, when's the last time an agent actually facilitated a trade? Like, you hear this all the time.
I don't know.
We heard this last year.
Sure the hell not in Vancouver.
I don't know when it's ever happened.
Yeah, I don't know either. And I don't even know how much they can really do with that. Like, be like, hey, do you want this player? It's like, well, yeah, we like this player, but we don't have room for this player. Man, I will be so glad when this flat cap era is over. We've heard reports that the cap is going up to 87.7 million next year, which is a modest bump, but there's a lot of things right now where the NHL is shooting itself in the foot a bit, and this flat cap is certainly something that for the fans, I mean, we talk way too much about the cap, and I just long for the days when there's hockey trades that can be made again, and you can get a return for a guy like Connor Garland that you actually want, and a team can get a guy like Connor Garland who they actually want. Because right now, Connor Garland is a very serviceable player, could be a 45, 50-point player, could get you 15, 20 goals, can forecheck, can skate well. He's a guy that can play on any team in the league, yet there's not a lot of value for him because he is a winger who makes close to $5 million. It's crazy.
I mean, the wingers are the running backs of the NHL right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
how running backs in the NFL don't have a
true.
lot of value. It's kind of the same thing with the wingers in the NHL, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the issues is there's just too many wingers and a lot of them don't have value. There's maybe a handful of guys in the NHL that are top, like obviously Ovechkin being one of them. You know what I mean? There's maybe 5, maybe 6 top flight wingers that teams would probably, Kachuk I would put up there as well. And yeah, for Garland to kind of, paint himself and his representation into a corner like this, I think it's a real kick in the nuts to not only this management group, this coaching staff, but the guys in that locker room. And I would hope some of those guys in that locker room have kind of called him out for it. I mean, I don't know what the relationship is like off the ice, but I would hope it's like, hey man, we've been trying our best to not have any distractions heading into this season. And then you pull this shit the day before our first game of the season.
My hope is he gets up in front of the team or hasn't already and apologizes. And unfortunately, I have a landline in my place, apparently, that I did not unplug.
Jeez Louise. Landline. What
year
is this?
I own a landline.
My goodness.
Nice.
That is well, after this, you'll have to if you're missing this game right now, you'll have to make sure that your VCR is recording it, because this Chicago-Pittsburgh game is pretty interesting to watch. Go and make sure your VCR hasn't run out of tape.
Well, people got mad at me on the weekend because I said I went to the grocery store and I forgot my wallet, and they're like, "Oh, you don't have Apple Pay or Google?" I'm like, "No, motherfucker, I'm 42 and I like my life. So you know what? Deal with it."
Hey, speaking of wingers, I want to bring up the trade the Canucks made this week, because another winger in the fold, Sam Lafferty, coming to the Canucks for a 5th rounder.
Center.
He's a center. He's a
center.
center.
Sorry, he is a center.
Come on.
He is a center. He does play some wing too, but yes, he is a right shot center, which is something the Canucks desperately needed as well. 5th round pick going back the other way. This, I mean, again, we mentioned Twitter and the fans going off on a firestorm about this. I'm not too bothered about trading 5th-round picks. I'm more bothered about trading 2nd-round picks, which the Canucks seem to always do. 5th, whatever. I'm okay with that. The odds of a 5th making it are pretty slim, anyways. And I do like Sam Lafferty. He was quite good with Chicago and Toronto last year, from what I saw. This is a guy who does improve the bottom 6. It is an upgrade, and it adds a little more depth. And I also wonder if the Canucks made this move knowing that Garland could be on his way out in some capacity. But guys, a 5th for Sam Lafferty. What do you guys think?
I mean, it's a 5th for a guy. Like, again, like I forget what they said the odds of a 5th-round draft pick, even playing 10 games in the NHL is, but it's not good. And, you're trading a lottery pick, like a very, very, a lottery pick that doesn't have good odds for a guy that's going to be in your lineup 100% on night one. So a guy that's been over 50% in the draws. And, my assumption is that he's going to either be plugged in on either Suter's or on Bluger's line if Bluger's playing tomorrow night. And the nice thing is, especially on the PK, is that you can allow your centers to focus on their strong side. So, if it's on Bluger's strong side, he'll take the draw. If it's on Lafferty's strong side, he'll take the draw. So it's just it's an easier way to get better face-off percentage, which this team has not been very good over the past 2 years, and it's clearly something that they wanted to fix. And we see this team, especially on the PK, if you can win that initial draw and get that puck down the ice, it's such an advantage, and it really calms down your PK. Whereas if you lose that draw, and especially the way they had been losing draws over the last couple of years cleanly, it really puts you on the back foot right away. Even though I do believe structurally, there's that word again, structurally they're much better on the PK than they've been in the last few years from what I saw in the preseason. Winning that initial faceoff really does change everything. It really does calm you down and allow you to set yourself into your structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think a 5th-round pick, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Like, I was so surprised watching people freak out
The
about
ghost of
trading a
Jim
5th-round
Benning.
pick for this guy. Well, I agree.
Yeah,
It's
there's a
just
bit of
like,
that.
but it just doesn't make sense. It's like this guy's a right shot center. He's fast. The Leafs gave up a 2nd-round pick for him last year before the deadline or at the deadline. They gave up a 2nd-round pick for him. We just got him for a 5th. The other thing with Lafferty too is he's a UFA at the end of this year. So, we've got Lafferty, we got Beauvillier.
I think there's 7 UFAs.
Dakota Joshua. Yeah, Teddy Bluger, obviously, Dakota Joshua. So there is an opportunity here. If this Ian Cole, there is an opportunity here. Tyler Myers, yeah. There is an opportunity here to, if it isn't working out with Lafferty or the season is a complete waste, there's an opportunity to turn these into future assets. And I would assume giving up a 5th-round pick for Lafferty this week, you're going to get more for him unless, he's injured at the deadline if you need to trade him come February or March when the deadline comes up. I don't see the problem with a 5th-round pick. Like, I get it. I agree with you, Pete. The 2nd-round picks are the ones that I have an issue with, that this team managers going back before Mike Gillis, I think of Dave Nonis handing out 2nd-round picks, Brian Burke handing out 2nd-round picks. It's just gone on and on and on and on. And so it's nice. I get that, people want draft picks, but it's a 5th-round pick, people. Like, this guy is probably, a 5th-round pick. If they end up being an NHL player, you're probably at least 5 years away, I would say, from them making an impact on this team.
Well, I mean, you look at Forsling. I mean, Forsling, who we all got mad about because we gave up on him early. He didn't make the NHL until he was D+6. So he was 24, and he was, I believe, a 5th-rounder. I mean, it's just this notion of this fan base that needs a knee-jerk reaction to everything that happens. That there needs to be this instant, either I'm really happy or I'm really angry, rather than, hey, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to actually watch Sam Lafferty play, and then I'm going to judge him, which is what I'm going to do. I have no clue whether Lafferty was worth a 5th-round pick, whether he's going to stick on this roster. But I'm going to give him a chance to. I do like what I've seen. And, I mean, I do trust more so this pro scouting than I did with the previous regime that really struggled with their pro scouting.
There's
The
a
other
few
thing,
things.
sorry, Pete,
Oh,
I
okay,
just want
you
to
go.
jump in here really quickly, just jumping on Brendan's point about this pro scouting that I do really like compared to the Benning regime is if they feel like they've made a mistake, they're not afraid to move on from that mistake relatively quickly. I look at
Yeah.
Curtis Lazar last year, who, everyone lauded, great value, 1 million, I think for 2 years. So $1 million per year, right shot center as well. And it wasn't working out with Lazar. Yeah, maybe it was 3 years, but it wasn't working out for Curtis Lazar here. And they traded him at the deadline. You know what I mean? So I do like
Riley Stillman as well.
Riley Stillman, exactly. I do like the fact that, they will take swings. And if they miss, they will move these players on relatively quickly. Where the problem with the last regime is they would hold on to these players for way too long. And then what little value they still had was completely diminished by the time they were willing to try to trade them. Sorry for interrupting, Pete.
No, that's okay. So a few things. Just looking at the 2017 and 2018 NHL drafts, out of the 5th round for both those drafts, you've had a total of 17 players from those 2 drafts who have played in the NHL. Now, of those 17 players, only 7 have played more than 10 games in the NHL. So the others were all like just 1 or 2 or a couple of handfuls. So that's really 7 players over the 5th round over 2 years from kind of the, 5 to 6 years ago, from kind of that peak time where you want to have guys starting to make an impact. So not a lot of guys. So if people are going to continue to call all the 5th rounders who have made it, it's important to give some context. Yes, 5th rounders are always going to make it. Every draft, you can usually get a couple of 5th rounders in there, but the odds are still highly stacked against them. Also, with 2nd rounders with the Canucks, I remember last year I did some math, and the Canucks have actually taken less. How do I phrase this properly? They've Canucks been around 53 years, and I think it was something like 25 2nd round picks the Canucks have actually taken in their history. They've just not taken a lot of 2nd round picks as an organization going back to eternity. That was just something they were always trade away and look at and seem more reluctant to trade it and look at or keep it and use it as more of a capital in a sort of trade. And then the UFA thing, I would not be surprised even if the Canucks are in the playoff hunt, if the Canucks sell off as many UFAs as they can at the deadline. They're freeing up a lot of cap space this next offseason. Yes, they're going to have the OEL hit going way up, so that's something else you have to account for, but the cap's also going up. And I could see them looking at this as a good way to kind of bring in some more picks and then restock the cupboards a bit. I would not be surprised even if they're in that middle of that race, you could see all those guys that we mentioned getting traded and the Canucks actively shopping everybody.
Well, if you look back at the history of going on to your discussion on 2nd round picks and the Canucks not having many or using many. I mean, if you look back in the history, like let's go back 40, 35, let's go back to Pat Quinn. Pat Quinn assembled that team almost exclusively through trades. It's what he did. And I kind of chuckle at a fan base that considers Pat Quinn the greatest general manager in the history of this franchise, which I do believe he is, because they would have absolutely hated him. They would have hated him. They would have hated the way he went about building that team, because he would make trades much in the same way, like almost exactly in the same way as Jim Rutherford. He would make trades. If it didn't work out, he would jettison it quickly. You go through that stretch of time between 1987 and 1994. He made 49 trades between when he arrived in Vancouver in 1987 and the trade deadline in 1994. 49 trades. Some of them, a lot of them, like he would draft guys, or sorry, not draft, but he would trade for a guy, and it wouldn't work out, and they'd be gone within a year. And it was just trying to tinker with the roster to get it the way he wanted it. I mean, if you look at the 94 team, I mean, who do we have on that team that was a draft pick? Bure, Linden, and then I think Antosky.
Yeah, Antosky was a 1st rounder.
Yeah, I mean, and that was it. I mean, people have to understand
Ojic wasn't. Oh no, Ojic was Ojic a draft pick?
I would have to look that up whether Ojic was actually drafted by the Canucks. He might have been. But like at the end of the day, people need to understand that there's more than one way to build a contender. And just because they've been spoon-fed this narrative in this city that the only way to do that is through the draft, doesn't mean that's true. There are other ways to do it. And this team has a different philosophy with which they want to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. And to me, like, I'm willing to give them a couple of years to let it play out before I say, well, this is clearly not working. Let's blow it up.
Mike Pekka and Yuri Slager were also Canuck draft picks on the team.
Yeah.
But
I would also
neither of them played, though.
Slager,
I'll have to check it. I'm not sure.
Well, here, you guys talk. I'll look that up.
Yeah. I would say this, though. I would also say, draft picks aside, and yes, the Canucks have been historically the bottom third, maybe even lower than the bottom third drafting. But I would argue almost more important than draft picks, developing players. And that has been an issue of this franchise since its outset. It
Absolutely.
is not developing players properly. And I think, that is the one thing you can criticize Rutherford and Elvine and all that stuff. But the one thing they did extremely well with their time in Pittsburgh was develop guys. And I think that is the one thing that I want to give these guys time to see. I agree with you, Brendan. Maybe in 2-3 years, the plan's not really coming into focus. Maybe it's time to make a move. But I think development has been a huge issue for this franchise, and the lack of development. I mean, go back to the Edmonton Oilers when they had all those first round picks. They had 3 of the first overall picks in a 5-year span, I believe it was. And then they still ended up with fucking Connor McDavid however many years later. And that entire team, the Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Hopkins, to his credit, has very much developed into a really solid NHL player, like way more than a solid NHL player. Like, he's probably one of the more underrated players in the entire league. And he's obviously overshadowed by McDavid and Draisaitl. But they didn't develop those guys, Jordan Eberle, I forget the defenseman. He ended up in Pittsburgh. I think they actually got him. He refused to sign with the team that drafted
Schultz.
Schultz. That's it. That's right. They didn't develop any of those guys properly. You know what I mean? They rushed them all to the big club, and a lot of them weren't ready. And I think, that's been one of the big issues with not only the Jim Benning era, but the Canucks franchise as a whole. And I think development is as, if not more important than actually drafting players.
I mean, if you look back, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it is a huge part of it. Pekka and Slager, they played games. Yes. Neither one played in the 94.
And Gino was drafted by the Canucks in the 5th round. 5th round. There you go, guys.
Oh wow, there it all comes back full circle.
There we go.
But if you, but I fully agree, and it's something with you, Doug, and I've harped on this for so long, is that everybody looks at drafting and they think, okay, well, if this doesn't work, or if these players don't make it, it's because their amateur scouting was awful. And I don't believe that at all. I believe that is just like the first in a very long process to getting a player to where you ultimately want them to go. And you have to set up your system. And I feel like this regime certainly is. The continuity between Abbotsford and Vancouver is so important. I mean, the only time I can remember within this team's history where they were, semi-decent in terms of their development was in the early 2000s. Like, really, Landline? This thing never rings ever.
You're on the pod. Hey guys, I know we could go off on this for a while here, but we got a couple more things we got to hit on here, because we could do a whole episode on developing. And we got a couple more things in the Canucks world, but Brendan, I'll let you finish your thought there. And then I want to talk a little bit about Stan Smyl.
No, yeah. So I was, if you go back to the only time that I really believe that the Canucks developed well, it was in the early 2000s. The back half of the end of the Brian Burke era and the Dave Nonis era. And why that is because you had that continuity between your AHL teams. If you look at that AHL group of players, a lot of them were coached by Alain Vigneault. So he knew them. He had helped them get to where they were. He understood each player and what their issues were. And so to have that sort of continuity there between your AHL team and your NHL team was so vital, because that system that he preached in Manitoba was what they ultimately were playing when they got to Vancouver. I don't believe that continuity has been there in years. And
No.
to Doug's point, I think there's been a lot of rushing as well, which has also been a big issue rather than, hey, let these guys play. That's why I have no issue. Let Podkolzin play the entire season in the AHL. Let him figure it out. There's a player there. We know he's there. It's just of letting them unpeeling back the layers of that onion and letting him get to where he needs to ultimately get to, which I think he can. But we're just so impatient these days, very impatient.
Yeah, and Manitoba was a good era for the Canucks farm system, but when you have the team in Syracuse or Chicago or Utica, it makes things a lot tougher. And I think we're seeing more continuity with Abbotsford. I think this is just fantastic, and we've seen a lot of the other teams in Western Canada and the West Coast have their teams out here as well, which it didn't used to be like that. It used to all be kind of clustered around in the Northeast. Guys, Stan Smyl stepping back from the organization. Dude's 65. He's been with the Canucks for decades and decades. I mean, for me, this is a case of a guy who's been at a job for decades and decades and wants to spend some time back and spend more time with his family. No real issue with me. I'm wishing him all the best. I'm a little surprised by it. Guys, any schemer thoughts?
I mean, for me, he turned 65 this year. I mean, he lost his wife last year. And, at some point we all want to retire, and I don't think he owes this organization anymore that he's already given. He's been with them since, I think, 1979. So 43 years, almost my entire life, which I kind of hesitate to admit that, but it is what it is. And yeah, I mean, I think it just at some point, in your life, especially after you lose your spouse, things become a little more difficult. And he just wanted to take a step away from it. He'll always be part of this franchise in one way, shape, or form as an ambassador. But I'm happy for him. I'm happy that he's stepping away on his own terms, and I wish them all the best.
Yeah, like you said, he spent 43 years of his entire life with this organization, 65 years old, lost, his spouse last year. It's probably time for him to just kind of reflect and, take a step back. I mean, we're seeing this more and more, with some of these alumni across several different franchises. And, I think there's a lot of talk that if he ever had an issue or he wanted to talk to Aquilini about anything, he could easily just pick up a phone and call him, and Aquilini would listen. I think last year or the year before? I think it was the year before, with the press conference. And I think it was when someone threw a Horvat jersey on the ice, and Steamer, got really emotional and upset about that because, the jersey means so much to him, being a lifelong Canuck. And, I think like all of us, he just wants to see this team win, but he also has to look after himself on a personal level. And I'm actually happy for him. You know what I mean? Sometimes, you get in these situations, and I'm not saying he still doesn't love the Canucks, but, it's probably best for his own health and mental well-being to take a step back, especially at the age he is.
Yeah, and also I believe he goes in as the only Canucks GM to be undefeated. He was 2-0 as an intern GM there as well back when he was filling in there. If I remember correctly, he just stepped in for a couple games there. But the guy's worn so many hats in the organization: scout, GM, director of whatever, captain. Good on him for getting to do it on his own terms and take a step back. 2/3 of your life with one organization. That's a long time. Speaking of guys being with the organization for a long time, a lot of hope that Petey is. There's been a lot of chatter, a lot of different voices, and again, the information kind of has filtered out, maybe not as it was intended to. You saw Rasmus Dahlin signed a big contract this week, which I know Doug, you as well. You and I were chatting a bit about that contract and saying maybe that's comparable. This Petey thing, we talk about distractions. It's going to hang over the heads of this team until it gets done one way or another. I think it will get done. Do you guys think it's going to happen sooner rather than later? We saw the Jets as well make some signings this week. Do you think it's going to really wait until the end of the season? Do you think there's any chance that we're going to see it at some point before game number 82 is played?
I think this is going to go exactly the way that, or at least at this current time. I mean, who knows? Maybe he signs tomorrow and I'll be stunned, but I don't see that happening. I think both sides want to see how the season goes for at least a little bit before they sit down and really discuss this. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's not like they don't have, or that he turns to a UFA at the end of the season. It doesn't work that way. So at the very least, they have 2 years of control of him. So I don't see why you need to rush this. The only reason you want to rush this is because people in this market are going to try to make it a distraction and make it into something, bigger than it is. And I'm not saying that it's not important to sign your best player, but at the end of the day, they've both spoken and said, or at least it's come out, that both of them want to see how the beginning of this season goes. And I have no issue with that. I think that's healthy for both sides, because I think there is a lot riding on the beginning of the season, and we want to see where this team goes and how they fit into this Tocchet system. I think that goes for not just Petey, but a lot of players. How do they acclimate themselves to this system, and which guys does Tocchet feel like he can win with, and which guys can't? And I don't think there's any doubt that they can win with Petey. But you know what? Let's give this some time. Let's see how this works. Let's see how this beginning of the season goes. And I'm sure at some point, if it goes well, the two sides are going to get down and hammer out a deal.
Yeah, I don't think it gets done until the offseason. I think both sides have said they're going to wait to the offseason, because best case scenario, the Canucks are playing amazing. They're guaranteed a playoff spot. Well, Petey's probably going to be one of the main drivers of why this team is being so successful. And his price is going to go up for whatever they have theoretically on the table now, and what they've been discussing back and forth between management and agent. That price, depending on the team, will only go up if they're playing well. And if they're playing poorly, well, then, maybe Petey is going to want to look at making a move. I hope not. I don't think so. I think it's just posturing from both sides. I do think management's a little, I don't know if upset's the right word, but maybe frustrated that Petey hasn't bought into taking more of a leadership role with this club. I know he came out and said, it would be an honor to be the captain, but he doesn't think he wants to be the captain. And again, I still think Quinn Hughes was the right choice. Don't get me wrong. But I think they're kind of leaning on him to kind of be more of a leader. And again, I'm not in the dressing room, so this is complete speculation, but it doesn't feel like he's really bought into that for whatever reason. It feels like he's kind of always had a bit of a distance. And sure, he's close with a couple of guys, obviously him and Brock and Nils Hoglander, and I assume him and Quinn Hughes are good as well, but he just hasn't fully bought into wanting to be part of that core, it seems. I'm not saying, maybe he has, but just outsider looking in, and, some of the posturing you're hearing and reports you're hearing, I know Friedman kind of threw that grenade, not like we didn't have enough dealing with already. He threw that grenade yesterday, I think it was, about the Canucks management not sure if they want to sign Petey as well. But again, I think it's just, posturing. But I do think a deal gets done, but I don't think it happens until the offseason.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's probably the way it's going myself. I don't know about I just think sometimes certain players aren't necessarily full captain material. He's looks like he's a part of the leadership core. We saw that at the Hughes press conference. But yeah, I think this is going to be a long talking point, unfortunately, over the year. For me, it's, again, though, I'm with you guys. Like, if this deal gets done when it gets done, the team has control, and he's not a UFA. So it's not the end of the world for myself. Guys, we got a bit of time. Do you guys want to do some hot takes for the season? This is something we've done in the past, Brendan, and we always get them terribly wrong. I like, not just wrong sometimes, like I just look back and I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? So that's a fun time to make some bold predictions. We each can do one here and do a hot take of the season. Doug, I know this is one of your favorites, so why don't you kick us off here?
So I know we kind of discussed before recording what we were going to, what our hot takes were, so we all didn't have the same one. I'm going to call a bit of an audible here. And I'm going to say, even though I do think scoring is going to be down for the Canucks this year. I don't think they're going to be as high scoring of a team as we've seen the last couple of years. I am still going to say Quinn Hughes ends up a point a game player and ends up with 82 points on the season. Exactly a point a game player. That's my hot take. Quinn Hughes finishes the season with 82 points, making him a point a game player.
I like it. I like it. Well, because
I want to go last. Pete, you go.
Yeah, you are going last. I'm going next. All right. So the one that Doug and I both picked the same one before, and I had actually made a change to mine, but now that you called an audible, the original one is available. I had it worded slightly different from yours, but I'm saying the Canucks move into the top half of the league on the penalty kill. I think there's enough new bodies in here, and if Demko is playing on form, I think the Canucks could surprise a lot of people with the PK. I mean, can't really get worse. So I think we can all agree that it's going to be improved, but I think it's going to be improved enough to get us into the top half. Doug, you had said top 10. I'm going top half just to give it a little bit safer. That's kind of one of my MOs this year, is trying to not get too far ahead of myself. I'm going top half of the league.
Throw a percentage at me. What percentage will they be?
I'd need to look at all. I don't even know what are good penalty kill stat percentages anymore. I don't know. So I'm just saying top half in the league in PK.
I swear to God, like, this phone has never rung this many times.
Yeah, they know you're on there. But yeah, that's what I'm going with. PK is going to be much improved enough to be in above that mid-range mark. We're going to be in the top half of the league. All right, Brendan, you're up now. Unless you got to answer that landline.
I think it's like somebody from China who wants to sell me something. I'm going with God. See, Doug throwing an audible has me wondering if I should throw an audible. Like, I've got two here. I could just say them both. I'm just going to say them both. I think Connor Garland's going to score over 20 goals, and I think Thatcher Demko is going to be a Vezina Trophy finalist.
I like it. I like the Demko one in particular. That's something that's being bantered around a bit, and he's looked pretty good. And Hughes, we're all kind of hitching it on. These are things that the Canucks need to have a good season, right? Even Connor Garland, if he can up his trade value there, that's gonna help it. I like all these.
Just on Demko. I mean, I think with the way that the system that they're implementing, if you can get Demko playing in a system where he knows where the shots are coming from, he doesn't have to guess. Like, I mean, the last few years, 3-4 years that he's been full time with the Canucks. I mean, the amount of cross crease saves he has to make, these miraculous saves going post to post, yeah, they're fun to watch, but it just got out of hand. And so now, if you can give him a more predictable environment where he knows where the shots are coming from, he knows the saves he's going to have to make, I just think it puts him in a position to be the kind of goalie that we all expect that he can be. Now, the biggest thing for him is, can he stay healthy? I like having Casey DeSmith back there as a backup. So, that gives you at least some sort of a cushion there if something does happen. But it's incumbent on him to stay healthy. And one way you can help him stay healthy is, again, that predictable environment. Doesn't have to be all world in net, going post to post 10 times a night, having to stretch and do the kind of splits that every guy watching the TV cringes at. Give him that environment where he just has to stop what's in front of him, and you'll find him, I believe, a good chance of being a Vezina Trophy finalist, if not possible.
Yeah, I mean, if he's not having to face 30 plus shots every other night, that will help as well, right? I mean,
they were really good in the preseason. And again, it's just the preseason, but they were good at limiting shots. And it's just, I think that more compact system, blocking shots, getting in shooting lanes, they were much better at that in the preseason than I've seen them in honestly in quite a long time.
Yeah. And coast to coast, you're right. Fun saves, but it's not going to help your save percentage, because those are some of the toughest shots to save in hockey. And if the Canucks can cut across those, and that's a last resort, and you're dropping the number of those you have to make a game, that's going to help the penalty kill. That's going to help Demko. That's going to help everything there. So again, it kind of comes full circle.
And just so on my other one, if Connor Garland scores 20 goals on another team, it still counts. It still counts.
Yeah, fair enough. Guys, good stuff. I think it is time to take it into the free pour here. And Brendan's first free pour as well here. So, Doug, start us off as usual.
All right, it's that time of the episode for the free pour segment. And I wanted to talk about a video game that is probably been one of the most immersive video games I've played ever. And that's Baldur's Gate 3. I've been playing it. It came out at the beginning of September for PS5. It's based on Dungeons and Dragons, and Baldur's Gate is a city in, the D&D world. And it's a really cool game by a really small game developer named Larian Studios, which just spent tons of time developing this game over the last 4 or 5 years. This game was in a playable beta state for 2.5, 3 years, I believe. It's an absolute home run of a game. If you're not playing it already, it is turn-based RPG style, which I do love. But Baldur's Gate 3, I cannot recommend it enough for all you gamers out there.
Nice. What platform is that, Doug?
PS5 or your computer.
Nice. I am going to talk about another docuseries that I just plowed through. I know I've talked about a lot of docuseries on here over the years, but you put out anything with aliens on Netflix as a docuseries, I'm going to plow through that pretty quick. So I just want to talk about Encounters, which has just got released on Netflix. 4 episodes. Already finished all of them. Two of the ones they talked about were something that I already knew quite a bit about, but they've chosen 4 really popular mass sighting cases, done a lot of interviews, a pretty good production overall with it. And again, as someone who's a bit of a UFO nut like myself, I'd love seeing more and more of these things getting approached scientifically and from different angles. And it's well worth a watch if you're interested into UFOs, or UAPs, as we now have to call them. It's just like, it's not weed anymore. It's cannabis. It's not UFOs anymore. It's UAPs. Encounters on Netflix. It saved me canceling my Netflix for another month at least.
All right, I'm just give me a sec here. Give me a sec here, because this will make sense what I'm doing here with my background. Hold on. Let's go. Will this work? Come on, work for me.
Well,
there we go.
Hey, look at that. All right. Not everyone can see you, so you're going to have to explain it.
Yes. So, well, if you're watching on YouTube, which you should be, get on YouTube and watch us. But there was a documentary that I had no idea about until just 2 hours ago. I don't know how, but there is a Mr. Dress Up documentary on Amazon Prime, I believe. Who didn't love Mr. Dress Up growing up? He was amazing. Casey, Finnegan, the Tickle Trunk, which as an adult sounds more weird than it did as a kid. But absolutely love that show. I'm gonna watch that documentary. He really was Canada's Mr. Rogers. He really was. And for a lot of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, I mean, he was a guy that we grew up with, as a child, and I hold him very dear. I got to see him in my hometown of Langley towards the end of his life. He did a live show, and I went there, and it was an honor to see him. And sad that he passed away semi-young in his 70s. He had still a lot more shows to do. But I love Mr. Dress Up. Check out the documentary, Amazon Prime. If it's not on Amazon Prime, I didn't say that.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Episode, I think we said this 148 now. The Canucks Speakeasy.
Quickly before we go.
Whoa.
1 second. Before we go, Pete, are the Canucks making the playoffs? Yes or no?
Hey, just give me a sec. I'm getting there, man. I'm getting there.
I thought you were closing the show out.
All right, we're just gonna do a pause. I'm gonna edit that out, and we'll go again. But yes, thanks everyone for joining us. Episode 148, just about in the books here. Thanks to Brendan for making his first appearance on here as well. And guys, just quickly go around the room here. Are the Canucks gonna make the playoffs? Doug, what do you think?
I'm going to say no, because the last 4 years, since we started this podcast, every year I've said, oh, they're going to make the playoffs, and they haven't. So I'm using a little bit of reverse psychology here, and I'm saying the Canucks don't make the playoffs this year.
Brandon.
Big brain.
No, and again, it's not that I don't think they're capable of it, because I do, but you know, it comes to a point where it's shut up and show me. You know, stop talking and saying that you're going to be a different team, and show not just me, but the entire fan base that you're ready to be a different team. That the sum of your parts equal more than they have the last 4 or 5 years. I do think coaching is going to is going to play a vital role, because I finally think that we have a coaching staff in place that can teach these guys the right way to play. But at the end of the day, you got to show me, and because they haven't shown me the last few years, my answer is no.
Well, geez, this is crazy. We're doing the no tic-tac-toe here, and my reasons are actually very similar to Doug's. I always get ahead of myself, and I always say that the Canucks are going to make the playoffs, and I'm kind of doing the exact same thing as you, man. I'm going the reverse psychology here. As if I say no, they're not, maybe there's more of a chance that they will. Hey, it is tough. They got a good chance. I really hope they do. I really hope they prove us all wrong here, but I'm also going with the reverse psychology approach this year. Folks, if you aren't watching us on YouTube, you can also follow us on Twitter, which is, as you can tell, we're all big fans of. I'm at Pete_Gas. You can also check out our outro playlist, the Canucks Speakeasy outro playlist. That is on Spotify. Give that a listen.
You can give me a follow on Twitter at Doug Then. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at Canuck Speak.
I'm at Jabo_Vancouver. Real name Brendan, but no one ever calls me that on Twitter anyways. So you don't have to either. Jabo, I don't give a shit. So call me whatever you want, as long as it's nice.
As always, thanks for listening.
Hasta luego.